In today's video, I've got some major news. The Supreme Court has just struck down most of President Trump's tariffs, around 70% of them, and this is a big deal. These tariffs were the core of Trump's economic plan. The idea was simple: tax imports, bring manufacturing back to the US, and generate hundreds of billions of dollars a year. Supporters believed it would spark a new golden age for the American economy. But now, that plan just took a serious hit. This is the Supreme Court. There's no appeal. The decision is final. So what happened? Normally, if a president wants to impose tariffs, Congress has to approve them. That means a vote in both the House and the Senate. But instead of going through Congress, Trump declared a national emergency and used that authority to push the tariffs through on his own. Not surprisingly, that move was challenged in court. These tariffs impacted a lot of businesses, especially companies that rely heavily on imports. The case eventually made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. The key question was this: does the president actually have the power under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, to impose tariffs this broadly? The Trump administration argued yes. They said the tariffs were needed to deal with two major threats. First, the flow of illegal drugs coming from countries like Canada, Mexico, and China, which Trump called a public health emergency. Second, the large and ongoing trade deficit, meaning the U.S. imports far more than it exports. Trump argued that this weakens critical supply chains and threatens national security. But in a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that the law does not give the president that level of authority to impose tariffs. In short, the court said this went too far, and now a major part of Trump's tariff strategy has been shut down. For over a century, no president had ever used this law to impose tariffs, especially not tariffs this big and wide-ranging. Even the Supreme Court of the United States pointed out there's basically no historical precedent. They also said the president's authority here may have gone beyond what's legally allowed. But let's be real for a second. You and I got ripped off. Big time. Why? Because about 90% of those tariffs were paid by American consumers. That means regular people like you and me. Tariffs sound like they punish foreign countries, but in reality, they're a tax on us. We paid higher prices on everyday goods. Now here's the crazy part. The government collected all that tariff money. But now, a lot of it is being refunded back to corporations. We're talking about companies like Walmart, Costco, Nike, Louis Vuitton, and their parent company, LVMH. More than 1,800 lawsuits were filed against the government. And guess who's getting the money back? The corporations. Not you, not me. So for the past year, all those higher prices we paid, that money is now being refunded to big companies. Corporations are expected to receive over $100 billion. This turned into a massive win for them. But it gets worse. The whole point of the tariffs was to reduce the trade deficit. The idea was simple: reduce imports, boost American manufacturing, increase exports, and fix the imbalance. But the numbers are now in. In 2025, the United States still had a $91 billion trade deficit, and compared to 2024, it barely changed, down less than 1%. So after all the tariffs, all the higher prices, all the promises, the trade deficit didn't really improve. Which raises the big question: if consumers paid the price and corporations got the refunds, what was the point? And you know what happened next? Other countries fought back. They didn't just sit there and accept it. They retaliated. They started shifting their supply chains and buying from other countries instead of the United States. So in the end, we actually ended up in a worse position than before all of this started. Now, here's something else you need to understand. In fiscal year 2024, under President Biden, the federal deficit was $1.83 trillion. What does that mean in simple terms? It means the U.S. government spent $1.83 trillion more than it brought in. They didn't have the money, so they had to borrow it. And that borrowing added to the national debt. Then in fiscal year 2025, under President Trump, the deficit was $1.78 trillion. Trump made a big deal about this, saying he reduced the deficit, and technically, yes, it was slightly lower. But here's the catch. If you remove the extra tax money the government collected from tariffs, the deficit under Trump was actually higher than it was under Biden. Which means we're not moving in the right direction. We're moving backwards. And honestly, this isn't new. Obama spent more than Bush. Trump spent more than Obama. Biden spent more than Trump. And now Trump is spending more than Biden. It doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or a Republican. Every president spends more than the last one. And the deficits just keep getting worse. Right now, the U.S. national debt has reached $38.7 trillion, and that number comes directly from the U.S. Treasury. So let's be honest. A lot of the promises we were given simply haven't come true, and most people aren't even surprised anymore. In fact, since all of this started, the U.S. has actually lost manufacturing jobs. Government tax revenue is projected to fall short by about $150 billion per year, and that so-called tariff golden age, it's over. The Supreme Court struck it down. So now the real question is, what happens next? So at the time I'm recording this, Donald Trump still hasn't responded yet. Normally, he reacts almost instantly with a post on Truth Social, but he is expected to speak in a press briefing very soon. By the time you're watching this, that response is probably already out. Now, the big question is what happens next? Because tariffs were the foundation of his entire strategy. That was the main plan to bring in tax revenue and push companies to manufacture in America. Trump could try to keep the tariffs alive using a different legal path. But if the previous law they used was their strongest option, then any backup plan will probably be weaker. And honestly, from his standpoint, this isn't looking very good. I'm also really curious about the State of the Union address next week because this ruling likely forced him to rewrite a big part of that speech. That said, I don't think he's going to give up on his trade policy. Even though the Supreme Court blocked the broad global tariffs, he could still move forward with smaller, more targeted tariffs. Those have a better chance of surviving legally if they're more specific. So, no, I don't think this fight is over, but it probably won't be as aggressive as before. Another option is that his administration could introduce new import fees. They wouldn't technically be called tariffs. They'd just be labeled differently. But at the end of the day, those costs still get passed on to consumers, which means Americans end up paying more. And honestly, if you want my personal opinion, I'm just tired of all of it. The taxes, the promises, the back and forth. Just stop. Tariffs aren't some magic solution. You don't create a golden age by making people pay more. To me, it feels like it mainly benefits the government through more revenue, and now possibly corporations too. But that's just my take. I want to know what you think. If you found this helpful, subscribe for more. I really appreciate your support, and as always, take care.